Hey, good evening and welcome. Today, I just finished watching Gladiator 2 in the movie theaters, and I have a mixture of both, let's say, disgust at how terrible it was, and also inspiration. I think the historical fictions at least inspired me to dig into this historical period and read the primary sources for myself. So it's both a good thing, at least for me, and the inspiration to dig into the original material, but then also it is disgusting in the sense that it really it botched up history so much in this Gladiator 2 film that I have jokingly remarked on my Facebook that if Ben-Hur would have shown up and become the best friend of the main character, and then somehow in the plot, Judas Iscariot showed up, killed both of the emperors, and became the sole emperor instead, I think that it could have been no less historically inaccurate. And on top of that, if more than just Judas showing up and Ben-Hur, had they actually, instead of attacking Numidia, instead of attacking one of their own territories, if they would have, say, attacked Judea and had a second Bar Kokhba revolt, or say they would have attacked, say they would have attacked Gaul and had a second Gallic war, it could have been no less damaging to historical accuracy. So that is why I've decided to whip out the actual primary source. This is my Loeb edition of Herodian. Herodian was it was and is the main historical source for the time period between the death of Marcus Aurelius and the accession of Gordon III. So it'd be between 180 and 238 AD. This is in Greek and English. And I think for the sake of my English-speaking audience, I want to mainly read this in English. I might, depending on how things go, basically read some of it in English, cut it off, and do another stream reading it in Greek, just so if somebody wants to hear me in English, they don't have to consistently hear me go back and forth to Greek and get bored, and vice versa if somebody just wants to listen in Greek. But the plan is I have books 1 to 4 here, and the next volume 5 to 8, and over the period of several months, I think this would be a good book to read through, because this is where the secular culture is at least somewhat interested in the fact that there is a film weekly portraying gladiators and this period in a fictional historical manner. So that being said, I'd like to dive straight into the first book of Herodian's history of the empire from the time of Marcus Aurelius. And I'm going to be reading a site. Do not expect this to be anything more than just me reading this and trying to understand history for myself. And anyone who wants to join along, I appreciate your companionship. So, starting off, it says, most writers engaged in the compiling history, whose concern has been to present a fresh record of the past, have aimed at winning themselves a permanent reputation for scholarship, since they were afraid that if they did not express themselves, they would be indistinguishable from the masses. But in their narratives, they have shown a contempt for the truth and a preoccupation with vocabulary and style, because they were confident that even if they romanced a bit, they would recap the advantages of the pleasure they gave to their public, without the accuracy of their research being investigated. Some authors, through the excellent quality of their style, have made trivial events acquire a spurious importance with posterity, greater than was deserved by the truth. They have done this either because they were bitterly opposed to tyranny, or because they wanted to give flattering praise to an emperor or a city or a private individual. My policy has been not to accept any secondhand information which has not been checked and corroborated. I have collected the evidence for my work with every attention to accuracy, limiting it to what falls within the recent memory of my readers. But I believe that future generations too will derive some pleasure from the knowledge of events which are important and compressed within a brief span of time. A comparative survey of the period of about 200 years from Augustus, the point at which the regime began and became a monarchy, to the age of Marcus would reveal no such similar succession of reigns, variety of fortunes in both civil and foreign wars, disturbances among the provincial populations, and destructions of cities in both Roman territory and many barbarian countries. There have never been such earthquakes and plagues, or tyrants and emperors with such unexpected careers, which were rarely, if ever, recorded before. Some of these men ruled for quite a long time. Others held only transient power. Some hardly reached the title and fleeting honor before they were deposed. In a period of 60 years, the Roman Empire was shared by more rulers than the years warranted, so producing many strange phenomena. The more mature emperors took greater care to control themselves and their subjects because of their political experience. The very young ones led rather less disciplined lives and brought in many innovations. This disparity in age and authority naturally resulted in different activities. How all this happened, I intend to relate in chronological order, taking each reign in turn. When Marcus was emperor, he had many daughters, though only 2 sons. One of them, named Vericimus, died while still young, but the survivor called Commodus was brought up by his father with great care. Men who were distinguished scholars in their own provinces were summoned by Marcus from all over the world to attend the boy and educate him for quite considerable fees. When his daughters came of age, Marcus married them to leading senators, choosing as his son-in-law not patricians of ancient lineage, nor men noted for their accumulation of wealth, but those of orderly habits and sober lives. These indestructible spiritual characteristics were the only things he considered real possessions. He cultivated every kind of virtue, and in his love of ancient literature, he was second to none, whether Greek or Roman. This much is clear from his speeches and writings that have come down to us. As an emperor, he was merciful and fair to his subjects by receiving petitioners and not allowing his bodyguard to drive away people that approached him. He was the only emperor who gave proof of his philosophy by his dignified, sober manner rather than by words and an ancient knowledge of doctrine. The product of the age of Marcus was a large number of scholars, since subjects always model their lives on the ideals of the ruler. Many erudite writers have produced histories of Marcus's bravery and moderation, demonstrating his military and political ability and his action against the inhabitants of the northern territories and those in the east. I have written, oh, thank you. I hear somebody commenting, sick, I caught a stream. Yes, this is the true history then by contemporary authors of the second and third century. I have, and this is part 2. I'm almost starting part 3 of book 1, and I will tell you when I start part 3. I have written a history of the events following the death of Marcus, which I saw and heard in my lifetime. I had a personal share in some of these events during my imperial and public service, and now I'm ready for part 3, or section 3, I should say. When Marcus was an old man, worn out not just by age, but also by hard work and worries, he was taken seriously ill on a campaign in Pannonia. Guessing there was little hope for his recovery and realizing that his son was at an age of early adolescence, he was afraid that the young man would grow up in control of absolute unchecked power without parental authority. As a result, he might refuse the discipline of his moral studies and habits and devote his time to drunken debauchery. Young men's passions are easily diverted from learning moral values and slip into a life of pleasure. Being a well-read man, Marcus was worried when he recalled rulers in the past who had succeeded to power as young men. For example, Dionysius, the Sicilian tyrant, who used to pay high prices for exquisite novel pleasures because he lacked sufficient self-control. And there were the excesses and violence of Alexander's successors toward their subjects, whereby they brought shame on Alexander's rule. Ptolemy even went so far as to break Macedonian and Greek law by falling in love with his own sister. Antigonus modeled himself completely on Dionysius, wearing an ivy wreath on his head instead of a royal Macedonian bonnet and carrying an ivy wand instead of a scepter. Still more disturbing was the memory of events in the not-so-distant past. Of Nero's behavior, which went to the extent of murdering his mother and making himself an object of ridicule before the people, and Domitian's brazen activities, plumbing the depths of cruelty. With such examples of tyrants in mind, Marcus was properly apprehensive about the future. He also felt considerable anxiety about the Germans on the frontier, whom he had not yet completely subdued. He had persuaded some of them to form an alliance, and he had overcome others by force of arms. But there were some who had fallen back for a time and retreated in fear of the presence of an emperor like Marcus, but who he suspected would despise Commodus for his youth and attack him. Barbarians are apt to be easily aroused, even for quite haphazardous reasons. Section 4. With a heavy heart because of these worries, Marcus summoned his advisors and the relatives that were with him and made his son stand beside him. When everyone was assembled and quiet, he raised himself up from the sickbed and began a speech saying, "I am not surprised that you are sad to see me lying here in this state. It is normal for men to feel pity when misfortune strikes their own family. If the suffering takes place before their eyes, it excites even more sorrow. But I think that there is something even more than that in your feelings for me. My own emotions toward you make me reasonable, confident there is a return of goodwill. Now is the right time for me to see that the honors and effort I expended on you for so long were not misplaced. And it is a good time for you to show your gratitude by providing you have not forgotten the benefits you have received. Here is my son, whom you yourself brought up, who has just reached the age of adolescence and stands in need of guides through the tempest and storm of life. There is a danger that he will be carried away and dashed against the rocks of evil habits because he has an imperfect experience of what to do. You who are many must be fathers to him in place of me alone. Take care of him and give him sound advice. Money is not enough to compensate for the license of a tyrant, and a bodyguard is not sufficient protection for a ruler unless he has the goodwill of his subjects as well. The rulers who inspired the hearts of their subjects with love by their goodness and not with fear by their cruelty were the ones who lived out the full length of their reigns free from danger. It is not people that are forced into slavery, but those who are persuaded to obey that regularly behave without suspicion, or any pretense of flattery, and they are treated in the same way. They do not rebel unless driven to those lengths by violence, arrogant treatment. It is difficult to regulate and put a limit to one's desires if power is at one's disposal. Therefore, you must give my son this sort of advice and remind him of what he is hearing now. In this way, you will provide yourselves and everyone else with an excellent emperor, and you will be showing your gratitude in my memory in the best of all ways. Indeed, it is the only way that you can keep my memory alive forever. After this, Marcus fainted and said no more. As he fell back on his bed, weak from exhaustion, everyone who was present was so affected by the sad occasion that some of them could not help groaning aloud. The emperor lived for another day and a night before he died, leaving his contemporaries with a longing for him and future generations with a permanent record of his goodness. When the report of his death was known, the whole army that was with him and the common people alike mourned for him. There was not a single subject throughout the Roman Empire that did not grieve at the news and join together with one voice to proclaim his praise. Some praised his kindness as a father, some his goodness as an emperor, others his noble qualities as a general, still others his moderation and discipline as a ruler. And all spoke with complete sincerity. Section 5. For the next few days, Marcus's son was kept busy with the arrangements for the funeral. Then his advisors decided to bring the young man to the soldiers' camp to address the troops and make a cash distribution, as was normal on the occasion of an imperial succession, so as to win the loyalty of the army by a generous donation. An order was given for a general parade on the usual ground. First, Commodus came out in front and performed the imperial sacrifices. Then, mounting the platform, which had been raised up for him in the middle of the camp, and positioning his father's advisors round about him, there were a number of skilled counselors there with him. He addressed the soldiers, saying, I am perfectly sure that you and I share in our mourning over the events that have taken place, and that your grief is no less bitter than mine, since I never pretended in my father's lifetime to be better than you. My father used to have an equal affection for us all. At least he used to like to call me fellow soldier rather than son, because he thought that the title of son was one simply conferred by nature, whereas the former name showed we all shared in his merit. When I was a small boy, he used to bring me with him and entrust me to your care. So I am optimistic that I shall win your complete loyalty without difficulty. The older ones among you owe me this service as your prestige, as your protege. As for the young men, I might reasonably claim that we were fellow pupils in arms, since my father loved us all alike and taught us all our virtues. Fate has given the empire to me as his successor, not as an adopted heir like my predecessors who prided themselves on the added power they gained, but as the only one of your emperors to be born in the palace. No commoner swaddling clothes for me. The imperial purple lay waiting for me the moment I was born, on the day I was both man and emperor. If you consider it in this light, you are more likely to accept me, not so much as a ruler that is presented to you, but as one who is born for you. My father has gone up to heaven and now sits as a companion of the gods. We must concern ourselves with human affairs and govern this world. Your task is to set our affairs in order and strengthen our position if you want to finish off the rest of this war most bravely and advance the rule of Rome as far as the ocean. By doing this, you will win fame for yourselves and pay a fitting tribute to the memory of all the fathers. You may be sure that he is listening to our words and watching over all we do. We should be glad to do our duty under the eye of such a witness. Your brave achievements in the past are attributable to his wise generalship. But what you demonstrate by your enthusiasm under a young emperor like me will earn a reputation for loyalty, soundness, and courage that is your own. And you will confer authority upon my youthfulness by your daring exploits. If the barbarians are checked at the beginning of a new reign, they will not now gain confidence from my immaturity, and later they will be cautious, frightened by their previous experience. After his speech, Commodus won the allegiance of the army with a generous donative and then retired to the imperial quarters. That is the end of Book 1, Section 5. I want to start up again with Book 1, Section 6 in the next stream. Thank you.